Welcome everybody, my name is Aileen.
And I'm Trisha.
And today, for our first episode, we're deciding to talk about an issue that's fairly important right now. It's important in general, but it's very applicable today. So it's Asian Americans and the Black Lives Matter movement. So we're going to start off by discussing some of the general attitudes of middle-aged Asian American immigrants towards the Black Lives Matter movement. Trisha, what do you think about this?
So often when we're talking to our parents or people that we know, we usually view the African American people as lazy, violent, or they're poor, they're criminals, thieves. These are just some stereotypes that we usually have that are really unfair, but have been put into our heads after centuries of oppression of these people. And most of our times, our parents or immigrants don't really know the history of the United States that well, or they give into the stereotypes, so they don't really know the basis for the oppression that happens.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I know that Hassan Minaj, in his video that he uploaded in response to the Black Lives Matter protests that are happening right now, he talked about how we, as Asian Americans, tend to love the idea of Black people instead of the Black people in our communities and in our daily lives. We love the idea of the movie stars and the doctors and the successes of the Black community, as opposed to just loving the everyday people that we're surrounded with. We tend to distance ourselves from the Black community as Asian Americans, which I think is really dividing the nation as a whole, for sure.
Yeah, so I was having an constructive argument with my best friend's dad, and he was telling me that Black people had privilege to this day, that a Black person with a SAT score of 1300 would get into Harvard versus someone with an Asian with a 1570, and he called that privilege. But he didn't know that most Black Americans aren't able to get loans from the bank despite being financially stable compared to white Americans, or that most Black people have to overcome a vast amount of struggles compared to Asians and white people to even get to go to college. So he considers that a privilege, while I consider that years of oppression taking its toll on the Black society. Or the fact that us as Asian Americans, we tend to live in middle to upper middle class neighborhoods, and we're not exposed to that many Black communities. And that means that we don't really see them. We're not used to the sight of them. So we don't get to work around these stereotypes.
100%. And a big issue is that we see African Americans as oh, they've been here for so long. Why haven't they gotten up and just gotten over it? That's a very common phrase nowadays. Just get over slavery. Just get over it. It was 400 years ago. But I guess they just don't understand that owning land in America has been everything in its past. And Black people have been deprived of this right for the majority of their history in America. And it's a huge way of power and having the right to vote and just being able to, like you said, get loans from the bank. These things have held back generations of African Americans and have just made them oppressed in this country for hundreds of years. And it's crazy that there's even any pushback for the Black Lives Matter movement. People not even wanting to acknowledge that any of this happens, especially in the Asian American community.
For sure. And a lot of times we see Black people in media, movies, or TV shows. Even there's a lack of Black representation. But yesterday I was watching a movie in which the cast was all white, but the one person who was colored or Black was a person who was in a prison cell for dementia, and he had committed an armed robbery, and they were portraying him as very evil and not willing to change. And that's usually the typical representation Black people get in movies nowadays. It's a little better, but it's still, when our parents watch movies like that and aren't exposed to Black people in general, these are stereotypes they tend to form that stick with them, and it's hard to change their minds about anything.
Definitely. And I mean, I know growing up, we always learned that African American rights were as important as white rights. And honestly, growing up, I thought that they had them. I had no idea that there was so many obstructions of African American rights in America. So what really opened my eyes was just learning about the history of African Americans, which is really easy for me as someone that goes to public school and has access to this kind of education. But a lot of times, middle-aged Asian Americans just don't have the time to be able to take out of their day just to learn about the history of the United States and the oppression that it has placed on a lot of its minorities, especially the African American community.
I agree. And sometimes when I was talking about the Black Lives Matter movement to my parents, they were saying that, oh, this is just a phase. We've seen stuff on WhatsApp or Facebook, but they tend to go away in 2 or 3 days. People tend to forget about them. Or they'll say stuff like, we've been through worse back at home. And I know Eileen was telling me how in Iran people are killed for protesting against the government. It's like that in a lot of Asian and Middle Eastern countries, so they're not used to all this protest and riot that goes on against the government in America, considering we have a constitutional right to do that. But they also say that there's racism towards Asian Americans, and there is stereotypes. But again, the argument is not all lives matter. It's right now that Black lives matter because they're more oppressed in America.
Definitely. And I think that, especially among the Asian American community, it's viewed as kind of like a contest. Who has it worse? Like, it shouldn't be that way. A lot of people are like, oh, but our country and our people have struggled so much more than African Americans, even though that most likely might not even be true. It's just that it isn't a struggle for who's the most oppressed, who in specific should be helped right now, because we see all these Black lives being taken and all this racism impacting African Americans day in and day out, actually across the entire world, honestly, because there are some places in the world where Asians are not discriminated against, especially in their home countries. But a lot of times, African Americans and Black people in general are discriminated against in the whole world. There's nowhere that they can really run to and not be discriminated against. Even in home countries, there's often discrimination against the color of the skin, how light or how dark it is, and it's very tied to these old imperialist ideas that have been ingrained in us since um, a long time ago, and it has really bad effects even today.
I agree. And sometimes that even in our own home countries, we kind of advance or not even advance, but support this colorism because I know that in my language, Hindi, we say kala, which means crazy, but it also has a negative connotation for Black people. Like my mom will say that. She's like, oh, look, there's a kala person over there. And I'm like, Mom, like, can't say that. Like, it's time to get over this a stereotype or this thing, or like there's no need to be scared of someone based on their color. And I know in Farsi, Eileen says,
We say siyah pust, which means black skin, and technically it's a neutral term, but the general use of the word makes it incredibly negative. You don't just say it just to point out that someone is black. It tends to come with this connotation of like, oh, this person that I'm speaking about is unintelligent, or this person that I'm talking about is lazy. Just all of these stereotypes that are reverberated throughout Asian American communities about black people.
I agree. And we see this in high school all the time. We see not even Asian American youth, but everyone that tend to appropriate Black culture. They say the N word, or they're like, I'm not white, but my friend said it, so I can say it. Hey, give me the N word pass. Oh, it's in the song. I can say it. But these things are things that should not be said by anyone because it has generations and centuries of pain. That's the connotation behind words like that, which should not be used anyways. And most people don't know these things because either A, they're not educated, or B, they're very ignorant considering they haven't had struggles of them in the past. It's okay to listen to rap music, but be conscious of the vocabulary and don't be silent.
Exactly. And a big thing to also notice is that black culture is in the foundations of this country. Every genre of music that is truly American has roots in black culture. And it's not surprising that Asian American youth tend to adopt this black culture, but then they take it a step further. They tend to appropriate this black culture. The N-word usage is very rampant among Asian American youth today. They just are bystanders to this issue of racism, and they tend to contribute to it very heavily. Whenever there's anything wrong with the black community, whenever there's the Black Lives Matter protest going on, they're completely silent. And that is very astonishing as an Asian American youth to hear, because you listen to this rap music. Why are you not so conscious of its vocabulary, of its history? Why are you so silent? And that's very angering. And it's really important to note that although Asian Americans have gone through their struggles in this country, we have the Chinese Exclusion Act, we have like the immigrant quotas in the past. That's definitely not fair at all. But we have to understand that African Americans have been in this country for over 400 years, 300, 400 years, and they are still being treated awfully by their own country. And it is a very big issue that must be addressed, and must be addressed now. It should have been addressed long ago, and I can't believe that it's still a problem. And we as Asian Americans must come together for our fellow minorities.
I agree. And one thing that you can do is, you know, teach your parents that it's not okay to watch this happen, that Black people go through the same struggles and even more struggles than we go through every day. It's important to take note that educating people is the one way you're going to make a lasting change in society. Please tell your friends, tell your relatives, try to talk to them, teach them about the context of Black people, how they came into America, how they've been oppressed for so long. Because education is the one way you can make an impact that will last rather than a social media post or a tweet that's trending. Although those are important to spread word about, these are things that are important in the long term.
Definitely. And make sure you target the young people. I know that young Asian American youth, like people maybe like 5 to 10 years old, their brains are so pliable. And oftentimes they just take after their parents. I know that my little sister tended to have the same kind of stereotypes and taboos in her head regarding Black people. She had like a kind of negative perspective on them. And it took me a long time. And I would educate her day in and day out. We would have discussions about slavery. We would have discussions about the history of America and the way that people have been oppressed in this country, to show her that it's not just what it seems, it's not just what the media portrays, as long as you can educate your siblings, especially your younger cousins, the young people of this country, we have better hope for a better future.
I agree. So I was talking to my mom about this Black Lives Movement, and I told her, like, you know, Black people are being oppressed. She was like, oh, okay. Like, she didn't really have a reaction to it. And then I tried to explain to her why this was so important that we're making a change. And she's very well educated, but she didn't know what slavery was. She didn't know that Black people were like slaves, and she didn't know the context behind why Black people didn't have rights. My cousin, who is also, he has a PhD, he's very well accomplished. He didn't realize, like, he didn't know. I had to explain to him what slavery was, and I couldn't even explain it. I just thought it was so well known in America, but apparently it's not that well known. People aren't that educated, and when people aren't educated, they can't make a change. So it is not as well known as you think. Not everyone gets the opportunity to take American history, or not even American history, just have a good education where they can have knowledge about other countries and slavery or problems in general.
I agree. And most definitely, it's important that you're not only learning about the slavery, but you're learning about the way that it's still affecting America today. And although a lot of people know about slavery, they were like, oh, it was like 300, 400 years ago. You need to understand the way that the system is built. I know that I'm not very well versed in the way the system is built. I know there are a ton of loopholes, especially like the ones that make it really difficult to prosecute an officer. Things like this. Like, we need to understand the history of America in terms of slavery, and also in the ways that it reverberates even today. These big movements and these big important people, they're very recent. These issues are very recent. I know today or yesterday, I believe, I saw this picture of these little girls in the Belgian Congo from 1955, and they were sitting next to a cage with a black child in it, poking at it like it was like an animal. And it was so astonishing to me. But it really makes you realize that that was 1955. That was when your grandparents lived. They were definitely young children during that time. They pass down what they've learned from these experiences down to their children, and they pass it down to their children. So it's no wonder that racism is still an issue in this country, because we educate. Another big way that we can help out with the Black Lives Matter movement, especially as Asian Americans, is to support Black owned businesses. If you Google it, there are definitely lists for your cities. Just look up your city and then write Black owned restaurants or Black owned libraries, or not libraries, like bookstores and such. So we're going to link a couple of lists in the description of this episode, because it's really important that we support Black owned businesses and we help them gain more economic friction in this country. They need to be able to make more of a difference, and the way you do that is through economic power, for sure.
Another thing you can do, which I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys know about, is signing petitions. We'll link a link that has most of the petitions that you can sign from multiple and various occasions. But by signing these, even though a lot of us don't have the right to vote, it gives us a voice in the government, which is so important for the government to know that there are people that, you know, care. There are minority and youth that care, because we are the future of America. And if we don't start now, and if you're lazy and you say that, oh, it's just one position, my voice won't matter, it does matter. Every vote matters. You never know when you could be the difference.
Exactly. So if you think about the way that you just thought right there, you're like, oh, I'm not going to sign this. I'm not going to take this action. Think about the 1 million other people who feel the same way. They're like, oh, we don't really make a difference. The 1 million of you guys combined absolutely can make a difference. And that's why it's so important to speak up about these things, to sign the petitions, to protest safely if you can. The next biggest important thing that you can do is vote out your corrupt local government officials. I know in our case, for our mayor, he ignored the COVID crisis for such a long time. He did not lock down anything. But then the second that there are protests trying to protest against something that is fundamentally wrong in this country, he put the city on lockdown immediately. That is not the way that good leaders should be acting. Local government officials are often overlooked, but they're the most impactful in your day-to-day life. That is what is going to impact you the most significantly. So you need to, if you can, vote out these local government officials. Look in your newspaper, figure out when election dates are, educate yourself about the backgrounds of these candidates, and really go out there and vote out your corrupt local government officials.
I agree. Local government officials, even in your city, those are the people that impact you day to day, like Eileen said. Other than the president, who's very important, I agree, but government officials actually have a direct impact on you, your family, your housing, everything. So those are the most important people you should be voting for. So read about it, be politically aware of what happens in your city, because these are things you're going to have to care about when you're older. Why not start caring about it now? The faster and quicker you can educate yourself, that's the faster, quicker way to make a change.
Definitely. And of course, donate as much as you can. I know this must be very difficult for a lot of us, especially as students. I know that I don't really have a lot of money to my name that I can go out and donate, but donate what you can, especially to the NAACP, Black Lives Matter organization, Black businesses. Again, we have a link down there to a list of well-trusted places where you can donate your money. If you don't have any money to donate, that's fine. There's a lot of streaming donations, like on YouTube. You can look up Black Lives Matter streams, and then you can just watch through these videos, and the ad revenue hopefully will be donated to the Black Lives Matter organizations that matter the most. And make sure not to overdo it, because these videos can be marked as spam if you watch them like 40 times in a row. So try to watch different ones from time to time, but just leave it on the back of your computer while you're doing your homework or something, or while you're watching Netflix. Just leave it rolling in the back. You plus like 1 million other people doing this, a lot of money can be raised right there for the Black Lives Matter organizations.
Another thing you can do is step in when you see racist behavior or speech. Correct your friends. I don't care if you feel like you're going to be like, oh, they're going to make fun of me for trying to correct them. No, they're not. It doesn't matter. Try to correct them if they say it. If you see someone saying it that you know, be like, hey, dude, that's not cool. It's not cool to say those words because you don't know who you're hurting. Or report people in powerful positions. If you see people doing something wrong, you have a moral duty to report them. It is really important that you use your voice, because if not you, then who?
Definitely. And really ironic thing that I see lately is a lot of the people that I've heard and called out on for their racist behavior and or speech, they're all of a sudden taking it back. They take it back all of a sudden, especially as college applications are coming around. They tend to, oh, sorry, it was just a phase. I didn't really mean it. So now when it really matters, they know that this racist behavior or speech is really wrong. That's why they know. They know that it's wrong, especially because they care so much about it in terms of what it's going to do to their future, yet they still partake in this behavior anyway. So it's really important to call them out on it, correct them on it, even if they laugh at you. They're the ones that are going to have to face the consequences, but especially the Black Lives Matter movement in the communities that are most impacted by their hateful speech, they're going to suffer as a result. And you need to be able to step out there, out of your comfort zone, correct these people who need to be corrected.
And they don't want to change, and they probably won't change, and they chalk it up to immaturity or teenage youth, which shouldn't matter.
Definitely. Another thing, if you can protest during this time, do it. Please. It's really important that you get your voice out there, but remember to stay safe. We are still living in the midst of a massive epidemic. Make sure that you try to socially distance as much as possible. I know that that's difficult. Wear a mask. Please wear a mask. Wash your hands very often, sanitize them regularly. Make sure not to share water bottles and things like this. just be very safe when you go out and you protest. Especially take care of yourself. Try not to get your face in any of these photographs. It's very dangerous for you and for your family. So go out there and protest if you can. Be peaceful. We know a lot of the looting and stuff has been done by either police or people that are trying to make the movement look bad. So make sure that you stay peaceful, that you represent the ideals of the Black Lives Matter community, and do what you can.
Don't treat it as a trend. Treat it like a lifestyle. Live by these ideals. It is not just a social media trend that's going to wear away in a couple of days. These are actual lives that you're fighting for. These are actual movements that you're fighting for. Most people have the privilege of running in their communities and not being scared that they're going to get shot or choked to death. But a lot of Black Americans do have that fear and live in that fear every day. That is not okay, and that should never be okay to live with. Treat it like a lifestyle. Preach these ideas. Educate your relatives. There's a lot you can do.
During this time of the two viruses, racism and COVID-19, there's a lot that we can do as Asian Americans because we are such a big community in this country. We have such great influence, and it is really our time to step up and speak up for this Black Lives movement as fellow minorities. And it's really important that we do so. It's really important that we educate ourselves and we do all that we can. So now we're going to move on to my favorite segment, the social news of the week that we're going to offer. So every week we're going to, at the end of every podcast, add a little bit of a tidbit, some social advances that have happened this past week, which are really exciting. So Trisha, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. On a lighter note, in a historic milestone for the LGBTQ community, Costa Rica just hosted its first legally recognized same-sex wedding ceremony in Central America.
And the Costa Rican president, Carlos Alvarado, tweeted, "Costa Rica officially recognizes equal marriage. Today we celebrate freedom, equality, and democratic institutions. May empathy and love be the compass that allows us to get ahead and build a country where all people fit. Happy Pride Month." This is huge for the LGBTQ plus community,
Yes.
and we're very happy that we're making such advances. So that was our social news of the week. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at FirstGenFailures. I'm Aileen.
And I'm Trisha.
And we will see you guys next week.